You're listening to the third season of the Ministry Mind Leadership Podcast with me, your host, Kim Cooper. Each episode, we will speak with leaders from across Canada with the purpose of bringing connection, engagement, and encouragement. We hope these episodes will challenge and equip you along your ministry journey. Well, welcome to Ministry Mind Podcast. We're really excited today to have Heidi and Chad Billington join us. As well, you might notice that I also have my husband joining us. This is Greg, for those of you that don't know him. And today we are going to have a little roundtable discussion about being in ministry together and kind of the balance of ministry and family life. So we invited our good friends, Chad and Heidi, who also minister together, to just have some conversation. We hope that this is a really encouraging conversation, that you feel like we don't have it all together, but that we can just talk about it, have conversation, open some dialogue, and I think it will be a good conversation. Do you agree, Greg?
Of course I agree.
So, Chad and Heidi, you guys are out on the East Coast, and some of our listeners might not know who you are. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you live, your family, your ministry, how long you've been married, that sort of stuff?
Okay. Yeah, so we are in the great city of Fredericton in the province of New Brunswick on the rugged and gorgeous coastline of the East Coast. And we've been married we had to look it up.
You had to look it up. We're 17 years. I'm the math guy.
17, 18, whatever. And we have 4 kids. So Zoe is 15. Aaliyah is 13. This is always the big test, right? As a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Nate is 11 and Violet is 8. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's, and we have a dog too, just to add to the chaos as well. Yep. So yeah.
It's perfect. A dog.
And we serve at Smythe Street Church in Fredericton too. Right. That's where we've been. Church I grew up in, spent a lot of time in growing up, and Heidi came to in our university years. And lo and behold, we're still here.
So tell us a little bit about where you guys serve, like what your roles are like and how long you've been doing those.
Okay. Well, I've been serving here at Smythe Street Church on staff for 18 years. Actually, before I went away to school, I went to seminary for a period of time and had some time to travel and study. I also worked here for a couple of years right after university. So I'm a pastor. It's kind of a nebulous answer there. I specialize a lot in Christian education and home group stuff, but I also, for lack of a better term, I call myself the crack fill guy. Often I'm the one who, if there's something that needs to be done or a project that needs spearheading, our lead pastor, Werner Drostel, sometimes say, hey, Chad, I want you to spearhead this, or I want you to get this initiative going, or kind of work on stuff. Occasionally I work with the board a little bit as well on agendas and organizational stuff. But I've been doing that for about 18 years since my second coming, because I grew up here from the age of 10 onwards. So after I went away, then I returned again, and it's been 18 years doing that.
Yeah, and I've been doing, mostly my focus has been on next gen ministry. So in our environment, that means birth to grade 12. And I've been doing that, well, it's kind of a long and twisty road, but for the last 14 years, starting out as a volunteer, moving to director, then part-time staff, then full-time staff, then ordained ministry. It's kind of been like the long twisty road towards being a pastor whose primary responsibilities are birth to grade 12 with a little women's ministry on the side.
A little on the side. There's always a little on the side, right?
And there's always a few cracks to fill too.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about how you each felt the call to ministry, what your journey to ministry was like, because I know it was different for both of you.
Yeah,
and then kind of like how you maneuvered that together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start. I grew up in a Christian home, Christian family. My grandfather was a Baptist pastor, actually, who did prison chaplaincy work as well on the side. And I grew up with just a desire for ministry in my bones. I still remember, even as just a young kid, probably age 5 or 6, standing behind a suitcase and preaching at my mother as we're getting ready to go somewhere. that's one of those key memories that's kind of formative in my years. So I always had a desire for God and for ministry, but growing up, due to some workplace injury stuff, my dad wasn't able to hold down work because of some health issues he had. And so we didn't have a lot. So for a period of time, I was very much a maths and sciences guy in school. So I debated as to whether I wanted to pursue becoming a doctor or a dentist or pursuing ministry, even to the point that when I was in my first years of university, I was taking science courses along with biblical studies courses where I was. And it was about halfway through my university career in my undergrad that I realized, I'm not going to be satisfied in any other place. And I said, you know what? So I stopped taking the science classes. I said, my heart is in ministry. I was working as a volunteer with youth at the time. And so that was kind of where it began. And then when I got done my undergraduate degree, I'd been serving faithfully at the church, and I just knocked on the door and said, hey, would you guys have a place for me here? I realize it's kind of cocky thing to do at the time now, but they said, you know what, Chad, we need someone to do maintenance. So if you can change light bulbs and fix doorknobs.
Literally crack filled.
Literally, I did maintenance. I learned how to do electrical work. And they said, if you'll do that, we'll give you like 20 hours a week part-time doing that and helping out Elaine Cayley, who was our youth director at the time. You can do part-time youth ministry and that. And then I sold shoes at Walmart, and that's what I did for a year and a half. And then as I did that, then eventually I felt a call to go to seminary, one of those like God spoke to me moments, one of the anchor ones of my life. And God provided for me to be able to go and study down in the States for a few years. And then travel. And so then when I got done my seminary career, I was praying about where to go, and I was putting my names in. I applied for a church in Qatar in the Middle East. Like I was wide open. I was like, God, I was in New Zealand at the time studying at a seminary. And I was like, I could go anywhere in the world. I'm wide open, God. And then I got a call when the Qatar thing didn't pan out. I got a call from Smythe Street saying, would you consider coming back? And prayed about that because I didn't want to just make the safe decision, go back home, because I'd been raised here, I'd known here. But where I ended up was like, God's will is, doing what you're called to do in the moment you're called to do it. And so I ended up coming back here, and I met Heidi at the desk. Actually, like within a week of coming back, and a year to a date of us meeting at that desk, we were married. But her story of ministry is differently than mine.
Yeah. So for me, I grew up not in Fredericton, but just in love with the church and God, and found my belonging in the church in a lot of ways. But the different roles that I would have seen as possibilities for me as far as ministry go was a little more limited. So, I learned to do all the things that women were allowed to do. And I didn't really consider the fact that there could be other opportunities for me in ministry outside of playing the piano, which I used to do really well, singing in the choir, teaching kids ministry, or like being one of those really wild and amazing missionaries in a foreign field somewhere, with all the freedom to do whatever she felt the Lord directing her to do. And so I was really encouraged that to pursue my love for working with kids and get my teaching degree, which is a little more stable than trying to sort out finding a husband quickly at a Bible school. My dad wasn't really excited about that idea. And so although I did have one of the elders of our church tell me that I was going to marry a tall, dark and handsome pastor one day and be a fantastic pastor's wife, so we could see that actually panned out. So he was on to something there. But I did go to a university here in Fredericton and get my education degree. And then I bumped into Chad, and we got married. And I taught for about a year and a half, I guess it was, before we got pregnant. We weren't really sure how that happened, but it certainly kind of, derailed my plan for getting a teaching contract and getting set up that way. And then 10 months later, we found out, whoops, we're pregnant again. And so that kind of changed. Greg's totally like confused right now.
No, I'm not confused.
That kind of changed my professional path, I guess, because with two young toddlers and infants at home. It was kind of like, how are you going to pursue this contract? And then our lead pastor, Werner, he called me up. He said, I know you're on mat leave. Our kids program needs some help. Would you come volunteer? And so that kind of became my seat at the table, for lack of a better word. And then the kids ministry grew quickly. The leadership team grew quickly, and my role started to change very quickly. And then moved into a part-time position, and then a full-time position. And then I bumped into some limitations as a volunteer that I didn't like not being able to baptize the kids that I was ministering to because I wasn't a pastor, or not being the first call when a child was sick at the hospital because I wasn't a pastor, as a volunteer. And as I bumped into those limitations, I've never really liked limitations. And it stirred up that call inside of me from when I was a little girl again. And certainly with Chad's help, he really fanned that flame, that call inside of me. And long story short, 4 years ago, I was ordained, and the journey continues.
Well, and part of that ordination journey was realizing that you could even pursue that ministry.
Right.
Because when you were growing up, those weren't even options that were perceived or available to you either.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what I hear that I love is that he kind of advocated and pushed you towards seeing that potential in yourself. And that's similar with our story, because you just kind of have, it's almost like those limitations are there, but you're the one that chooses to believe them until someone helps to pave a way or to advocate a way for you to see beyond that. That's
Absolutely.
awesome. What do you guys love most about serving together?
I get to look at a hot woman at the staff table every.
And you're allowed to.
Oh no, don't edit that out. That's so good. I like it. It was funny. It actually partially comes back to what ministry has its challenges, but one of the things I really enjoy about doing ministry together is having someone who can see and encourage something in someone else. So for Heidi, when I see what God's put in her heart, I was like, no, God's put that there. You can chase that. And I want to encourage you in your call and kind of shove you out for opportunity. I think about this is before she was involved as a pastor on staff at our church, but she had a passion for a project we were doing with World Vision in Haiti. And I'm saying, yes, I can push you out the door and say, you need to go to Haiti, which lots of interesting stories about that I can't get all into today. But you go and I'll take the kids, or you go and I see this opportunity. I want to try and encourage you to pursue your vision, which a couple should do in any environment. But when we're in the shared work environment, we can kind of say, no, I see this happening in the workplace even, and you need to pursue that, would be something I would say.
I think that common mission, like the understanding of the common mission and goal to just be all out for Jesus and support each other, but also love our community together, and to be able to talk through those intricate details and complications and stresses, and really know that the other person understands kind of where you're coming from and has that heart for the betterment of our people and all of that. I think that shared common mission would be one of the things too.
For sure. What do you love?
And I was just thinking, like, we can attack things together. Sometimes when you were just in a volunteer role, there was limitations to that, where I would say, oh, we're going to do this thing, and I know you'd be really good at it. I think you should lead it. But you can't, because you've got commitments with
doing
your
other
work,
things.
and with the kids and different things like that. Now, when we're working together, it's like, well, how can we attack this thing together? And I see you really good at doing this. How can I support you in this? And
or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the one thing that changed for us when we actually started working together, when it was like, actually, okay, we're attacking this together. Someone had approached us, one of our congregation members had approached us and was really worried that we had too much on our plate. And by taking this on together, like, how's that going to affect your family life and, that sort of thing. And what she didn't realize is that we were putting that time and energy in anyways. But now I didn't have to play 20-question quiz when he got home from a board meeting or something like that. I had to ask the right question to tweak him to remember all the details of like, and so it was a bit of a shift for us where like I was an active member and participant in the decision making and stuff. And then therefore we didn't have to talk about it when we got home because we'd already talked about it at work. Or when we did talk about it, he didn't have to play catch up. I didn't have to play catch up or that sort of thing. We were actually feeling like we could have those discussions from that takeoff point. And so I think it actually helped our home life a little bit more.
Yeah. And I was just thinking like oftentimes when we leave work, we want to leave work at work a little bit. Being a pastor, it's not that hard, or sorry, it's not that easy to leave work at work. So when I get home and you want to ask me a bunch of questions about work, I'm like, oh,
I don't want to talk about
I don't
this.
want to talk about this right now. And I am a slow processor, so she does have to ask the right question to mine it out of me instead of me saying 2.5 weeks later, oh, by the way, we talked about this. So it has helped with you being at the table, part of the decision making, and
just being more aware. I used to always say, I don't know, it's his job, ask him. Which people didn't really like. They didn't know why I didn't know, but I had other things to do.
Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the unique challenges that we face as being ministry couples, ministry families?
I think for us, so one of the things is those boundaries and limitations, because ministry life can be very much, it is relational, right? So how do you draw those lines for yourself or yourselves as a couple, but then also for your kids on what acceptable boundaries or limitations are there. I'd say that's one of them. And then even like relationally, I would say trying to set up those expectations or to sort through those expectations between what kind of relationships are ministering relationships and what kind of relationships you need to be a little more wary of. Like, there's been times where we've let people in too close or given them too much what's the word I'm looking for? Too much influence in our lives or even the kids' lives, because maybe it's the right Christian thing to do. Right. And I wish that we had listened more to that, discernment or those gut feelings around the reasons behind why some people want to get close to a ministry couple or their kids. And so it's trying to set out some of those boundaries, whether it's time or relational, I'd say would be one of the things.
Yeah, that in kind of keeping with what you're talking about, Greg, about conversations wanting to leave work at work. That's one of the challenges. But when we're working together, in other environments, couples want to come home and talk a little bit of, hey, what are you dealing with at work? What's going on? And where we're both in the same workplace environments, we're invested in relationships and we're invested in what we do. So we want to feel free to talk about it, but then it can be, when do you ever get a break? Because the office, go home with the office, Well, no, but in a sense, like, how do I ever get a break from talking about office things or work things? Because sometimes those are the things that are your joys and your frustrations. Yeah. And when is the time to talk and think about other things? It can be one of those things, knowing how to turn that off.
Pursue other things.
Yeah.
Right? I think so much is all inclusive that pursuing anything other than that is tricky. Like, well, what do we talk about if we don't talk about work?
And and that's very real. Yeah. I think as a couple, even a thing to work on, a challenge is try to make sure that we do talk about things other than just work. Because in the same way that you would encourage people who have kids to talk about things other than just their kids, because eventually when the kids leave, you're still here. And someday if we're not doing ministry like we are now, we're still going to be here. We want to be here for each other. It's not letting work become the world.
Right.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think, I like that you mentioned that, how you would encourage someone on a date night to not talk about their kids. And that's exactly where my brain went, just as you were saying that, because you need to have that relationship intact around more than just work and kids.
Mhm.
Absolutely. What are we all going to do one day when we retire?
And we're staring at each other.
Going, who are you?
What were our common interests?
Yeah.
Did we have any?
What do you think is like something that that ministry couples struggle with, that we struggle with, that would be unique?
Well, I think sometimes we know too much. And because we know too much and we don't necessarily filter, sometimes our kids know too much.
Yeah.
And so we have to really pastor and parent our kids through those types of conversations. And like I'm a pastor's kid, and I knew way too much growing up.
Yeah.
And so how do we pastor our kids and parent our kids through those things? It's like, okay, mom and dad are talking about work stuff, about church stuff, and how does this make you feel even? Because it does affect them too when they hear about different things. And you guys can't talk about this outside of our family, but we want to make sure that you have a voice, and we want to make sure that you're heard. And we don't want it always just to be about church. We want, and so we have to really, really watch that we're not just talking about work at home. I think we do. I find it nicer for myself that we work together, because then we usually get a lot of that stuff
out of the way. Yeah.
That's not always the case.
Right.
But
and I think that what you're talking about is why we end up hearing about a lot of ministry kids that struggle. It's because they are given too much, they take on too much, and there ends up being hurt placed on them that they shouldn't have been privy to. And they end up taking on offense for us, and that's on us. So yeah, what's something that you guys are give us something that you are struggling or facing with today? Like what's the biggest hill you guys are facing with ministry life balance today?
Time.
And
part of that is phase of life, and part of that is ministry, and part of that is just coming out of COVID. It seems like everyone's turned the engines back onto the cars, and we're all putting the pedal to the metal. It seems like like we were talking about this month is like, holy camoli, it seems like everything's going full tilt right now. And then we've got a daughter who's high school production, who's out 5 nights a week at practice, and we've got 2 other kids that got the leads in their middle school production in a couple of days. It's just managing time. What were you saying about like nights out a week? We were talking about this before.
Yeah, I had a pastor tell me once, 2 nights a week, you need to just kind of make this decision. 2 nights a week is what you're out, because you're a pastor, you have to, meet with people, and they're not available during the daytime. And so I was thinking, well, that works, except if I do 2 nights a week with my people that I'm responsible for, and he does 2 nights a week, and our kids have extracurricular, that means we're never home together. And one of our values has been to try to fight for the family supper table. And so it more often than not, I'd say the majority of the time, we're sitting down eating supper together. And that's where we really prod for questions. And sometimes we get 1-word answers, and that is where we share the realities of ministry life and try to shroud that a little bit so that the details aren't there for the kids, but they certainly don't have rose-colored glasses around what it is to be in ministry, but that they're also not jaded by it or surprised by it when people, walk out of the church for whatever reason, or have issue with their mother or their father. So we're trying to navigate that, but that all happens for us mostly around the supper table. So it's fine if you're the one pastor in your family and you decide that 2 nights a week while your spouse holds down the fort at home, you're out. But that doesn't work very well if you're 2 pastors and you're both trying to meet with people in the evenings. And so trying to navigate time and fight for that family table for us has been really the trick. And one of the things that we've done well with as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we've done right and that we're continuing to do right is the fight for the dinner table. Like when we bought our first two houses, the only two houses we've had, our first two houses. But when we were freshly married and we were looking for a place, one of the criteria we set out, even before we had kids, was we wanted a place that was no more than a 10-minute drive from the church. Now that's not possible in everybody's context and urban environments. I understand that, but in Fredericton, it's achievable. And so our first house, it was I think a 10 or an 11-minute drive to our house. And then when we bought the next one, which is where we are today, it's on the opposite side of town in 10 minutes, the opposite direction of the church, but it's still a 10-minute drive. And the reason for that was we knew at that point when I was pastor and Heidi, we didn't know what was going to be happening with her vocationally. I knew I would have evening meetings, and I said, I want to be able to come home and sit down at the dinner table and have supper and be able to get back without feeling like I'm super rushed because I know there'll be evenings I need to be out. And we prioritize that even in housing purchase, and we've always prioritized dinner table. And there've been all kinds of studies in families that talk about who sit at dinner tables consistently with family fare better because of relational consistency. Now, right now we don't get it necessarily every night of the week. Like Thursdays are youth night and people are on the go and some of us stay through for youth, and I get that. But even with Zoe, who's in high school right now and in this production so many nights of a week, she normally gets home for dinner, and the nights she's not, she knows at the house that's happening. It's like an anchor.
Our kids' friends love our wild, crazy family dinner. Like it's unusual for many of them to show up and it's like, here's your seat and here's your plate and we're going to sit and we want to know what's going on in your life and tell us more about you. Yeah.
And we even pray.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is your exposure to prayer for the next month and a half. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I like you bridged right into my next question. What are you doing that's working? So I hear the dinner table. What else do you guys do? Because obviously with busy schedules, like, do you guys do anything? Like we both use, because I'm balancing multiple jobs. And so we kind of live by our day planners. And even once a week sitting down and going through the week and making sure that we have all of our ducks kind of in a row so that we know who's doing what when. What are you guys doing to balance that busyness? Because really, I think that this is, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is probably the busiest season we'll ever be in or have been in.
Let's hope so.
Right? So what are you doing that's working, that's helping that
we do share calendar as well. And to the point where our oldest, who's in high school, has to invite mom and dad to all of the things that she expects us to drive her to. Now there's the occasion where we're sitting in the school parking lot waiting for her and she texts us and says like, remember, I went home today. And we're like, oh, okay. We just had 15 minutes of quiet in the car. That's fantastic. But for the most part, it works pretty well. But we also have the kitchen calendar that's like a physical calendar. Like there's so many calendars. Just to try to stay on top of that. I don't know. I thought we were supposed to have one thing we were doing.
Yeah, the table's the one thing we got.
We need more. But
but honestly, I think so our son played hockey for the last number of years, and we're not doing that this year. And I feel like we have so much more time. But I used to ask the hockey families and our girls dance. It's the same thing with dance. Like a lot of the stuff is over supper time. And so I would ask people like, what do you not sit down and eat together? Like, is that a priority for you guys? I would just try and ask. And so many of them, that wasn't like, it's not happening. And that I think would be one thing that
I think for us, the table, it's a treat not to sit at the table, like to eat a meal in front of TV, watch a movie. So we try and prioritize that, even to the point that when somebody's out, like I was out on Tuesday night. Yeah. When I came home, I ate my meal at the table. Nobody else ate with me, but actually people did. We did sit around the table and still talked
with you while you were eating.
Yeah. And so, that's
so intentionally never put a DVD player in the car. And,
Okay.
you know, there were times, especially with toddlers, that we really second guessed that decision. But it was like, this is time where we fight together. This is time where we play together, we sing together, like the Greatest Showman soundtrack. Like you couldn't travel with us without knowing all of the words to all of the songs. Or we created those story games where, like, you know, I say 3 words and you say 3 words and we tell a story. And it wasn't all idyllic. There were times where we hated each other, but I think that that was really essential, that we just didn't take the easy road and plug on the DVD player and avoid that opportunity to kind of bond, for lack of a better word, you know, whether we're fighting or creating stories, we're still bonding. So
yeah. Actually, we do that, like, even just if I want to have a conversation with you, I trap him in the car. Because then he's like, he can drive and talk, he can multitask that way. And it's also a good place where, like, we're going for a drive. We'll be back in half an hour. And we go and talk something out if we don't want to talk about it at home.
Right. And then we do that with our kids too.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about this? And it's a great place because they can't go anywhere.
Yeah, there's actually a study that's coming out on that I just heard about when I was in Toronto, and they were talking about where the best faith conversations happen. This study should be coming out in January. I'll maybe put a link to at the end of the show on what it is, but it was a study on faith families and how families are helping their kids to build a faith foundation. And the top 2 locations for faith conversations with your kids are the table and the car.
Yeah. You know, one of the next gen pastor. So, you know, I've got the lingo and everything, but I actually do really believe it. Like we take the instructions in Deuteronomy 6 about, you know, teach your children along the way as you go. Well, we're not walking the streets so much anymore, but we are in the car together. You know, what do you do when you wake up in the morning? What do you do in those regular rhythms of your daily life? And Fuller Youth Institute has put out a lot of stuff around regular rhythms of your everyday life have a greater influence when you weave your faith through that with your kids. And so not perfectly, but we certainly try to make the most of those tuck-in times, those drive times, those, you know, meal times, rather than we're going to sit down and like, we have never forced devotional time as a family. And we've wondered if we've done the right thing with that numerous times, but rather than force a devotional time, we've tried to weave our faith story with our kids through the regular rhythms of their daily life. And we'll let you know in 20 years how that worked, but that was certainly been one of our objectives.
Yeah. Bedtime was the other high time for faith conversations. Sometimes I think it's just because my kids don't actually want to go to bed, but whatever.
That's long. What do we really think about end times? The other day, I was reading in the Action Bible, Mom, and what about Revelation? And it's like, oh, come on.
It's 9:45. Get back in bed.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll be experiencing the end times shortly.
Yeah, you will be. I read through the beginner's Bible with our youngest daughter, Kasia, and I read through it. We finished it. And then
this took you like a week or 2.
No, this took me a long time.
Did it? Oh,
it shouldn't have taken.
She reread through it.
She read through it in a week.
But
anyways, just something that was at that bedtime was kind of where that started.
Yeah. So what do you guys wish that you had known going into being a ministry family that you didn't know?
Yeah. We talked a little bit about this. I think we didn't know that we were going to be a ministry family you know, really, like he was the pastor and I was going to be a teacher, and then ended up, you know, with the babies and deciding to stay at home for a little bit. And so our plans as an early married couple shifted very quickly within the first couple of years. And so I think for us, holding loosely our detailed expectations of what the path was going to look like, and being very firm in the core things.
Right.
And then I think, by accident or just out of necessity, as I moved into part-time and then full-time work, we really had to decide for the family, and we're not perfect at this at all, but how to weave responsibility. So the roles when I was staying at home with our infants was, I was far more regulated to the house role, and he was out making the money, like very traditional kind of making the big bucks as a pastor.
Is that what that is?
The more traditional roles were there, but then as I moved out of the home some, he had to pick up more of holding down the fort at home. And so that weaving back and forth of responsibility, had our story been different, then maybe we would have stuck with that. If I had stayed in education, teaching full time, and then we had a family, I don't know. But I think, holding loosely to the details, but, being very core and solid in our foundational things. I think that'd be a good, I think I go back and say, oh, what do I wish I had known? And to be honest, I kind of struggle with the question, because I think there's no way I couldn't have forecast where I'd end up. So you got to hold loosely to things. I think that's the thing, is like, you can come in with the greatest plans, but what ministry looks like today is, and I can kind of project, I think in this amount of time it'll look, I have no idea. And just go into ministry knowing that you don't have a clue as to how things are going to unfold. Like, we didn't know that, surprise. I remember I came home to the pregnancy test, which was the weekend that the car died. And I came back from church service, and Heidi, I was talking to a woman in the kitchen, said, "Oh, I wonder if you're pregnant." Ha ha ha. And then I come home to a test on the table, and I laugh. I literally laughed when I found it. I don't know if it was nervousness, but I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is not what I expected to happen right now." Oh no, and over again, you just don't know what's going to come and what life's going to look like. Just so that we did figure out with number 3 and number 4 how that all happened. It was just number 1 and 2 that we were confused. Greg is still like, I'm still not sure how they missed the boat on this.
Actually,
he's trying so hard.
In our staff Christmas party, it's like, I don't know, there's another baby coming. So Pastor Wayne, one of our pastors, he got me for the Christmas gift that year, and he showed up with a book. It's not the stork.
So we figured that. We read the book.
I am biting my tongue so hard, you guys. You have no idea.
I love it.
Because both of my parents were pastors, I had it modeled to me to some degree. So I actually have a bit of a framework of what a ministry family was like, and growing up in that environment. I think, but it is still very different with you and I. Even the amount of, like, my mom only led really to the authority that she was allowed and what she had seen. And whereas I'm like, okay, go further, do more. And so, and that also changes the dynamic of our family too. So
for sure. So I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say about this question. If your kids were asked what the best thing about being a ministry family would be, what would they say? And what would be the worst thing?
I wish I'd thought to ask them this last night. To be honest, it would have been a lot more fun to get the actual answer. I would go, and I think the worst thing is how busy we allow ourselves to be sometimes.
Right.
Now, I have to be careful, because it's easy for those of us in ministry to think that this is a ministry specific issue. It's like, why are you not home? Why can't you be here? And they're police officers and doctors and nurses and shift workers. That is to think. And I think in ministry we can make it says, woe is me, I'm in ministry. And we have to help our kids. And this is something we have to tell them, remind them, is like, there are a lot of parents who are not in church work. This is not a church problem. But at the same time, ministry with this relational nature does place those strains on in a specific way as well. And that sense of how we're busy, or we feel that we've got to get out and do things for the church, it can be something that I think they struggle with at times.
Yeah, I think one of the positives would be raiding the birthday box in Sunday school, like at the end of the morning when mom's still tying things up, is go find the candy and eat it all or whatever. So there are perks with that, but I think they've also been given a lot of opportunity. That can also be a negative, but like during the pandemic, for instance, is like, I know you're 8, but I'm pretty sure you can run Pro Presenter and I need someone to do it. So, kind of throwing them in at an early age, and then giving them the opportunity, but also the community that they have around them. Again, there's some negatives to that community and their expectations, but there's also real positives for having a group of people who see your child and their individual skills or abilities and kind of feeling invested in their lives already. And so I think, I would love to see that the world in general, that kids grow up with 4 or 5 adults in their lives who are pushing them forward and seeing the gifts that they have. But I think that our kids have had that in a more natural way without it being such a forced thing than maybe some kids have. So I think that's been a plus.
Yeah.
I know that ministry kids can sometimes feel like they have a microscope on them and that they have to live to a certain standard or expectation, not even just to us, but to the greater church body, or even like the community, really. How do you guys help your kids cope with that? Do they experience that? How do you help them cope?
I could be rose-tinted glasses here at Heidi, so you can poke me. I'm Captain Optimist sometimes. I am.
Yes.
I really am.
It's beautiful most of the time.
I think we've got the benefit of one of the things I appreciate about Werner, and you can kind of come at me if you want on this, Heidi, is that he raised kids in a church environment. He was raised in a church environment and as a missionary on the field, and I don't feel pressure to try and make my kids be something from him as a lead pastor. I really don't get that, and because he raised his own kids, and he says, kids need to have their space, and one of the perks, our church is not a smaller church, so it's not like a small microcosm. It's not huge by any stretch of the imagination. We're not a mega church, but I think the kids have got the ability to be themselves, and we've tried hard not to put that pressure on them that you're a minister's kid and you need to look this way. Like I would hesitate to think if we have said that in our home. So that's just not language we use with them. Because we don't want them to feel that way. And my dad was a pastor's kid as well. So, and I know the expectations. I remember hearing a story. I'll tell you a quick story about my dad that kind of spoke to how I wanted to be. He went to a school dance once when he was like in middle school. And one of the teachers maybe attended the church, says, I heard that Gary was at the dance, la, 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 la. And he was playing checkers in the back. Like he had no interest in the dance whatsoever. And my grandmother was like, yeah, and you were supervising, so why were you there? And just basically shut the woman down. And this is like in the 60s, when my dad would have been young. And I thought about that whole sense that, no, you need to be able to allow your kids to be kids. And so like, even like a few weeks ago, they had the Halloween dance at the school where one of my son was going, and he said, oh, I don't know, do I want to go to youth group or that? Like they're having dress up night at the youth group. And it's like, what do you want to do? And it's not like, no, you should prioritize church. And it's like, no, he decided he wanted to go to the dance, and he had a horrible time. He ended up being sick the next day, and the music was too loud, but he had a cute Bob Ross outfit on, and he was hilarious. And most of our kids, they go to one dance and realize, wow, that's not that great. I'd rather be at youth group.
Right.
But the thing is, we didn't say, we're the pastors, or we go to church. I was like, you're a kid. What do you want to do? Make your choice. This is your choices. They're both interesting choices. And we give them the freedom to do that. So I'm sure they still feel that pressure in some ways. And we try and listen to that and help them with that. But I think the key thing is not to put that pressure on them as parents. And I'm glad we're in a church that doesn't try to put that pressure on them explicitly.
Yeah, I think that our oldest would have felt that probably more than anyone, not from a top-down perspective as much as her friends. If she was given an opportunity that they thought, they were jealous of maybe. And so it was like, you got that because you're the pastor's kid. So I think she's carried that a little bit from a peer level. But as far as top down, no, I think as a church, and then we're just not interested I expect certain things of my kids because I expect certain things of my kids, but that's not because they're pastors' kids.
And we don't tie it to the church that way. It's like,
No.
that's just how we operate.
Yeah, don't be hooligans at the superstore because I don't want you to be hooligans at the superstore,
Right.
not because you're pastor's kid. Yeah.
Exactly. What do you think? Like, he doesn't think.
I'd love to know what you think as a PK, right? Because that's a whole other thing.
Did you feel that growing up?
Oh yeah, you feel it.
Do you think it was perceived or like real?
It was real.
Yeah. I think it was worse back in the 80s.
Yeah. In the 80s and 90s, it was worse.
Yeah.
I remember getting yelled at for things that were happening in the church with the youth that I had no part of. But because I was a pastor's kid,
you should have stopped.
I should have done something, or I shouldn't have been associating with them, or like, what could I do? Like, I was 14.
Right.
And also it depends on the culture of your church.
Yeah.
It depends on the culture of the community you're in. We're in a small community.
Yeah.
And there are some things where we will just say, you know what, because we are the pastors, we don't think this is a good idea for you. Not because anything bad's gonna happen,
and not even necessarily just because it's tied to the church, but because it's tied to people are watching how you represent the Lord. And so there have been times, but it's been a conversation.
Yes, it's always a conversation. It's never you can't do this, full stop, like end of story.
Yeah.
It's a conversation. Why do you want to do this? Or what's the purpose that this thing is happening? And it's how many times has it happened? 47 times maybe.
Very, like, I think maybe a couple.
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah. So we're getting near to the end. I want to know what you guys would say to a young couple or a young person that's entering ministry, that plans to have a family or does have a family. What would be your advice to them?
Well, there's this book called It's Not a Stork. So I'd probably give that to them first.
That's wise. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good.
Keep that in the show notes.
You know what, having a family, I don't think that there needs to be an expectation that as a ministry couple, you have to have children. And I think we need to come against that. And I think, you can be a ministering woman and not have babies. Having said that, I do have 4, and there's been nothing quite like the opportunity that it's given me to learn servant leadership. I don't think there's anything quite like parenting to give you the opportunity. That doesn't mean that you necessarily take it always, to learn what Jesus's upside down kingdom looks like, to put someone above yourself, to serve in humility. So I think there's a real opportunity there, but as a couple, it really boils down to the two of us. And the greatest gift you can give your children is that they know that it boils down to the two of you, and that you are doing your best to fight for each other and to fight for your marriage. I think is key and an anomaly in the culture that they're growing up with. And I think to even say that, to yourselves, like what is it we learned I think it was in the marriage course, is like you take your issues and you put them out on the table away from the two of you and you tackle those issues together. I'm not saying we do that perfectly at all, but just that general idea that we're fighting for each other and against the issues or the situations, we're coming at those together, I think is probably key. And that's whether you have family or not, but especially once you have children, they need to see that, I think, in us.
I think with that as well, I think key things in a ministry family are authenticity and honesty. And this is essential in any family. It was like, oh, wow, if you can be a plumber and be dishonest, no. But I think being able to without overburdening our kids, let them know that there are things that are hard and there are things that are great. And like even in family, like this is just general good life advice, being able to be, honest with them, say, okay, we're going through a hard time, or we know so-and-so who's sick and this is what we do, and let them be part of your life as you do these things. Like my kids have been to funerals. I know kids have never been to funerals, but my kids have been to many. And we talk, hey, this is what happens. This is what's going on. Hey, Uncle Charles' mother died. What do they do with the body? Well, I'll drive you to the graveyard and I'll show you the hole, and I try and process things, because sometimes we we unnecessarily shelter or hide things. Yeah. And then it seems duplicitous, I think is the word for that. The other thing is, I think it's important, and what Heidi and I were talking about this earlier, about things that we've done right or things we've seen, is allow them to be a kid like any other kid as much as you can. In the early days, when the kids were upstairs, sometimes you'd have contests in the Sunday school or the kids department, and it can feel kind of weird to allow your kid's name to get drawn and win the big prize. And Heidi and the team upstairs had a conversation once saying, you know what, as teachers or as leaders, we're going to fight for our kids to have the same opportunities as any other kid. So just because you're a leader doesn't mean that your kid can't be picked. Just because you're on staff doesn't mean that your kid can't be the person who gets to do the dance and get a chocolate bar today. Right. And they talked to each other and said, if I notice that you're not giving so-and-so an opportunity because they're your kid, and it wasn't just us, it was also other leaders, then we're going to fight for your kid to get opportunity too. And I think trying to make sure that it's a place where all of a sudden they're not handicapped, but also get to find their own opportunity.
I think too that creating that sense early on as a family ministry team that like we're team B. Now we got the team B license plate quite literally because it seemed like a great idea. And now I just feel like the world is watching me drive down our main streets in town. And I'm not a fantastic driver, but just that general idea that team B does things together. If there's a big project, we're all on board with that big project, and that creating the framework, I guess, of what it means to be a Billington, I think really matters. Now that doesn't mean that, you have to cross your T's and dot your I's in a specific order, but there's a framework around what it means to be a Billington, and whether there's 3 Billingtons or 10 Billingtons, this is who we are. And I think that's a really biblical idea. Again, back to Deuteronomy, right? What does it mean to be a Christ follower? This is what it means to be a Christ follower. This is what it means to be a Billington. And this is what we do on Sundays. This is what we do. And that's not negotiable. So I think creating that sense of team as a family, and that we're all invested in each other in a certain extent, is important too.
Yeah, I think for us, I kind of like, we've had different seasons of ministry life like you guys have. And I think we need to be aware that our listeners will have very different ways of engaging in ministry, whether it's the husband, the wife, or if you're an individual. But it's just important to think about some of those things as you're entering in, and to have discussions like this where you talk about some of the pitfalls and some of the joys and some of the things that you have to wrestle through for each other. So my last question for you guys today is kind of a question that I ask everyone, but I'm tweaking it a little bit this time. What I want to know is, how do you engage your family in what it means to be ministry minded?
Yeah.
I think you guys have kind of answered it.
Yeah.
You've weaved that through our whole conversation today, but just give us your final thoughts on what it means to engage them in being ministry minded.
Well, I think part of it is what Heidi was getting back when we talk about creating identity as a family. Like, this is who we are. Like, that whole Team B thing, it was inspired partially because we had another family in the church that we hired one of them as a summer student with a government grant one year. And then, so we had them getting ready for VBS. And so she showed up, and then all of her siblings showed up, and they were doing it together, and they were Team D, great family in the church, just love them to bits. And that really inspired we have a different initial, but we're going to take that idea that this is who we are. This is the kind of people we are. We are the people who serve in church. We're the people who love Jesus. We're the people who stick it out together. And so I think just trying to create a sense of identity that we are a unit as a family that cares about things that matter to God, and trying to get them to feel that regardless of whether we're at Smythe Street or whether we're doing something else. That's who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah, and I think that faith being part of the regular rhythms of our lives, then it's not like, ooh, we have to teach our kids to minister. It's like, no, this is what it means to be a follower of the way. This is what it means to follow Jesus. And so this is what we do. Now, having said that, we only have one in high school so far. And so we're really aware that, you know, our influence will still be there, I believe. But our ability to make them do anything, it gets less and less as they get older. And so this is going to change, and we don't really know what that looks like. But we hope that, again, the framework of what it means to be a follower of Jesus will be something instilled in them. And then how they play that out as they grow up, well, we'll wait and see. But
yeah, it's how you set them up, right? How you've laid the groundwork and built the framework for it. And then now they're starting to make their own decisions and become more independent. And you pray and trust that what you've laid is adequate and that they're able to make those decisions.
Like you were saying about duplicity, if they see that this is who we are at home and at church and at the superstore,
right,
I think that will speak volumes. It might not, determine everything in their early adulthood, but I think retrospectively they'll look back and say, well, they might not have done everything the way that I would or right, but they were the same person.
Right.
Yeah,
for us as a family, we sit down and we've talked about what it means to follow Christ. We have, and how does our family do that? How does our family live that out? And what are our values? And we've written those things down.
Yeah, we actually started this a couple of years ago, and we do it twice a year where we sit down and go over, okay, so what does it mean to be a Cooper? What are our main values? And we engage the kids in making that. And, like one of our values is to be fun, to be fun people that people want to hang out with, and that we just bring joy to people's lives. That's one of our core values. And then from those values, we get each kid to make a goal for that coming year. So what are your goals for this year at school, in your faith, in how are you going to bring joy? Like
with your friendships.
Right. And that's been something that we've noticed the kids then start to talk about when they're struggling, or when they're happy that they did something,
or when they see something in our lives not lining up.
Yeah, there's that.
Hey, Dad, I thought, oh, right. Sorry.
But I like that you pointed out, we're kind of in the same, our oldest is 15, our youngest is 8. So we realize we're in the thick of it, and we're figuring it out just as much as anyone else. And, our kids have their own free will, and they're going to make choices and have consequences. And we don't know what that really looks like yet, but we're doing the best that we can. So I want to thank you guys so much for being vulnerable and just sharing your hearts and your lives and your stories with us and with the listeners today. And we pray that this is an encouragement to our listeners, whatever phase of life that they're in, but just that they can feel a sense of they're not alone. They're not alone. And it's tough, but that we're a community, we're a tribe, and we want to help others to do their best. And so I hope that that's what people hear today. Greg, why don't you pray as we close?
All right. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time that we've been able just to talk with friends. And Lord, as we've listened to different ideas, and we thank you that you do not leave us alone to struggle through this, that you walk with us as we minister as families. God, I pray that you would just be with the Billingtons, God, that you would watch over them and their family, that they would be a family that does bring joy to their community and their church and their friendships, Lord God. We pray for those that will be listening, as maybe they're struggling through different things. God, I pray that you would use different ideas and thoughts to speak into their lives. And God, that most of all, that we would have you, Lord Jesus, at the center of our lives, our ministries, our families, our relationships. So just be with us today, as whoever's listening to this, whenever and wherever. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.